Well, hello there, watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines with the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole, and Rachel Cunliffe, senior associate editor at the new Statesman. Great to see both of you. So as ever, let's take a look at the front pages first of all. Starting with the Metro, which leads on the parliamentary researcher who's been accused of spying for China. He's denied any wrongdoing. As does the Telegraph, Britain cannot afford to cut ties with China despite spying row. The Daily Mail says MPs are furious that they've been told not to name the researcher. The Daily Express leads with a special investigation into off-duty French police officers who they say prefer to party than stop migrants. Wilko is to close all its remaining stores as a rescue deal fails. That is on the front of the Financial Times. A third of young medics plan to quit the NHS within 2 years of graduating, reports The Guardian. The Eye says millions of people are going to get a boost to their pensions, costing the Treasury billions of pounds. The Sun leads with a story about TV star Brian Conley leaving EastEnders. And on the front of the Daily Star, here come the red fire ants. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to them. To Harry and to Rachel, welcome to you. The China spy story all over the papers. Harry, what is your understanding of it? The denial we heard from the researcher today, and how seriously it's being taken by government?
Being taken very seriously. And I think the most thing that's annoying MPs the most is this happened in March. This guy had unfettered access to Parliament. We're in a weird, sort of curious situation now. He's been arrested, he hasn't been charged. Post the Cliff Richard debacle with the BBC, where they named Cliff Richard, he was then later, charges were later dropped. He then sued for privacy. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. Another case involving the website Bloomberg, who were trying to name a banker who they were investigating, who had been arrested, meant that he was ruled to have a reasonable expectation of privacy. So we're in this absurd situation now where everyone knows in Parliament knows who it was, but the Speaker of the House of Commons stood up today and said you cannot name him. In fact, you cannot even discuss it. And I think having arrests of political activity involving the police, the security services, and then to say that we're not allowed to discuss it, you know, arrests in secret are, you know, the things of police states, which we're very much, I hope, not. So there's a lot of anger out there tonight in the Commons. There's a lot of concern that actually this is a marked escalation, allegedly, from China. And I think it's a bit of a wake-up call, really, for MPs about just how vulnerable that, you know, Parliament is.
So two issues. One is what access might have been gleaned from Westminster, you know, if the allegation proves true. Secondly, it's led to all sorts of debate about what our relationship with China should be. Now, David Lammy, Labour's David Lammy, saying it's not a binary decision of friend or foe. You know, you've got to be more nuanced about it. It's our fourth biggest trading partner. So there's a lot of debate now about that.
There's a lot of debate. There's particularly fierce debate, I think, going on within the Conservative Party between the China hawks, who want us to take a much, much tougher line, Ian Duncan-Smith, Alicia Kearns, and the more, I'd say, China pragmatists, maybe, who say exactly that. It's one of the leading global economies. If we're going to have any progress on global issues like climate change or like Russia, we need to be in the same room. We need to be having conversations with China. And the pushback to that, I guess, is that no one is really suggesting that we disengage entirely and we say, well, we're not going to play with you. We're Britain and we're going to not go and not be in the room and not have those conversations. But the question is, when we're having those conversations, how tough are we being? And the criticism of the Foreign Secretary for going on this trip over the summer after the arrest had been made without seeming to gain any concessions from China first. There were sort of worries that signalled that we, Britain, were taking a softer approach and that we weren't prepared to stand up for ourselves.
And this is James Cleverly, first visit in 5 years to China, effectively, you know, with the knowledge of this allegations against this researcher already in the bag at that point.
With the knowledge that the trip had to be delayed because his counterpart had disappeared. And so he was meant to go earlier in the year. The Chinese foreign minister disappeared and they had to wait until there was a new one so he could fly there to meet him. So, I mean, that sort of sums up the relationship quite well there. Weirdly, I think the Chinese could have made that trip a lot more awkward for James Cleverly. They could have been, you know, they didn't exactly roll out the red... Well, they did roll out the red carpet. It wasn't a bells and whistles visit, but there wasn't a row where lots of other people other countries go to fly to Beijing for these meetings, and they end up having quite a big Barney. So I wonder whether there was behind the scenes quite a bit of discussion about this. The Prime Minister certainly raised it when he met the Chinese Premier at the G20 on Sunday, after the story had broken. But what we can glean from the Speaker today was that, in fact, actually the Security Service did notify a select group of ministers and MPs directly involved, presumably Alicia Cairns, the Foreign Affairs Committee boss, who had this person literally on her staff, gave him a pass. How she spins her way out of that one remains to be seen, but there's a lot of anger that tonight. And also just looking at what this sort of China research group that he was working with were really up to.
Explain what. Well, just look at the Daily Mail while you're talking. This is where you said the anger that MPs are being told they can't discuss it.
The row about China has been going on within the Conservative Party, within the government for a couple of years now, especially when Trump was in the White House, when we were going to let Huawei run our 5G networks, and we had to sort of row back on that, and it was all stripped out. And so all these various groups are set up. Now, there was the International Parliamentary Alliance on China, which was a much more hard-line group. That's one that Ian Duncan-Smith, MPs like Bob Seeley were in. And then from nowhere came the sort of China Research Group, which was slightly more moderate, as Rachel said earlier, which was actually sort of a little bit more pragmatic. And actually, if you go back and look, they were, it was a little bit weird the way that was set up. And this is the one that this guy works for. Whether he's charged or not, it was definitely sowing division within the ranks of China skeptics. And that doesn't, people are thinking, MPs are saying, that looks a lot to them now like a sort of classic divide and rule tactic.
OK, interesting. And another MP from the Conservatives, Tim Lawton, I don't know if he was in the first group, I'm not sure. He said he'd been one of those who'd been sanctioned by China for mentioning the Uyghurs. And the point is, where's the sanction from the UK towards China, which is something that the FT picks up on? There's a strong case for action against Beijing as this cabinet rifts emerge over the spy scandal. So what are we doing in return, effectively?
Well, the MPs who were sanctioned, that was one thing that they really wanted from James Cleverly's visit. He wanted him to raise the fact that China had sanctioned British MPs, and that didn't come to pass. So the FT story is about, could we put them on, they call it an enhanced tier, where anyone working at the direction of China in the UK would have to register, and that could include anyone working for a Chinese company, essentially. So it's not quite saying you're a threat, but it's definitely raising the awareness level. The language around this is really interesting. The UK government won't call China a threat. They call it an epoch-defining challenge, which sounds to me like a phrase that's been, focus groups within an inch of its life. But the other thing this story points out is that the Treasury are very wary of going too hard on China because of the huge amounts of investment and Chinese money, which is one thing that the China hawks and the Conservative Party were trying to raise. How much influence does China have in its investment in our universities and our technology and our infrastructure? Does that mean that we cannot take as hard a line as we would like to because, there's the money aspect of it? And I think what we've got from this is that is a genuine concern.
I think where you've got to look where we were 10 years ago, the sort of golden era, as David Cameron and George Osborne
called it. They were going to build on nuclear power stations.
Exactly. And then Theresa May came in and said, actually, no, thank you very much. Started to pull the plug on that. It's now dubbed the golden era in Whitehall. What we've known now is the fallout over Hong Kong, the treatment of the Uyghurs, the lies that China told, frankly, in the run up to the global pandemic and the early days of that. We still haven't got the truth out of them,
and we may
on that.
Know.
And actually, diplomatic relations between Beijing and London are basically, they're pretty cool. They're pretty frosty. Yes, cleverly went. But it was the first time someone had been in a long time. The security services, the integrated review of our sort of security stance last year, basically did put China as the #1 state-based threat to the UK. That's given the security service a mandate to be a much more hard line. We're starting to see more and more of these sort of arrests. Last year, they put out a very rare, sort of unprecedented alert notice on a businesswoman called Christine Lee, basically saying to MPs, keep away from this woman. She'd been funneling money to the Labour Party. So there is a beginning to put a sort of ratchet on. But at the end of the day, realpolitik comes into it. It's a global superpower. We are not a global superpower. At the end of the day, if we want the cash, then, occasionally, frankly, we have to turn a blind eye. And that's what successive governments have done since they recognised China.
Well, it's 100 billion in trade, is it not? One wonders how much of it is us going to them. It's very hard not to buy something Chinese when you shop online. We haven't even mentioned Hong Kong or the threat to Taiwan, have we?
Yeah.
We'll leave that for now and move on to dogs. Awful video emerging over the weekend. Perhaps we'll run some of it if we can, actually. Just a warning, it's not a nice watch. An 11-year-old injured, others as well. People in the end having to grab sticks to get the dog off. What do we do about it? It's already itself it's a crossed breed, if you like. Is it the right thing to ban it, do you think, Rachel?
I mean, you have owners saying it's not the dog breed, it's the owners, and
which is the gun argument in America, isn't it?
The gun argument, and I'm sure there are lots of perfectly lovely dogs of this breed, but it does. I'm sure there are some, but it does seem that it's particularly strong, particularly aggressive, and able to be trained in a way that can cause real damage. We've seen a number of these attacks, and if there's a particular dog that is causing the majority of attacks, banning them seems to be a sensible way forward.
70%, they say, don't they? I mean, and this one, as you can see, it's a dog run amok.
I mean, the owners can't control it.
Well, the owner's in hospital. One of the people in hospital, the police said, "Oh, we're going to have a word with the owner," because that's all they can do. And they said, once they're out of hospital, once they get better, you just think, what is going on here? The problem is the Dangerous Dog Act is actually a very badly drafted piece of legislation, in the fact you can't act. It's actually quite hard to change it's very loose in its wording. So you risk, if you ban this breed, you risk dragging in lots of other breeds that look like this breed but aren't perhaps dangerous in it. And also we had this slightly bizarre situation this morning where Suella Braverman last night came out and said, yeah, I'm going to look into this. I've commissioned
and it's
research.
not her department.
It's not her department. So you wonder how much politics is actually going on in this. So DEFRA have said, well, hang on, slow down. This has nothing to do with the Home Office. This is our patch. But people have been calling this for months and months and months. And it's only so long before someone horrifically, I think, tragically, is going to get killed. And, it's another classic case of the government just looks slightly impotent on this, because it's trying to sound tough, but actually, at the same time, you've got officials briefing us that actually this is a very hard thing to do.
Yeah, because you then breed them again, so they're not actually an XL bully, they're something else.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Or it goes underground, and, for some, they're bred to be aggressive. The idea of dog fighting, ears clipped, you name it. It's a
Yeah.
anyway, an area
If the
that needs
government
looking
can
at.
ban nitrous oxide, which is of no danger to anyone, you cannot overdose on.
I don't
But it
think all
can't.
doctors agree with that.
And also,
But it
they've been trying to ban it for a year and a half, and they're still on the consultation phase.
But they can't ban dogs that can go out and injure other people. I mean, that to me looks a lot more dangerous than laughing gas.
Rachel, very quick minute, if you don't mind, on the eye.
Yeah,
The state pension.
the state pension, it's going up. Yay, paid for by working people whose taxes are not being cut. This is the triple locks absurdity continuing, in that when inflation goes up, workers suffer, pensioners get an increase. When workers finally get a little bit of a pay rise, pensioners get a boost as well. Triple lock is completely unsustainable. It's over a fifth of government spending. It's almost as much spent on it as the NHS. A lot of the people who receive it.
That's partly an ageing population. That's why pensioners are costing.
Well, it's an
the
ageing
state,
population, but if you think about the group that has been most insulated from inflation increases in rents and mortgages, it's pensioners who are most likely to own their homes outright.
But you're thinking about middle-class pensioners, aren't you? You've got money. There are a lot of people, pensioners, who cannot earn an income and therefore have no money.
Sure, but you're almost twice as likely to live in poverty in this country if you're a child than if you're a pensioner. So it's directly funneling money from people who are more likely to be in poverty, from people who are more likely to be wealthy.